Hi, grade 7 learners. You are now in your 6th week of learning for the first quarter. I am teacher Olga and I will be your guide in this learning expedition. Join me as we unravel the world through writing. Be ready with your pen, answer sheet, and learning activity sheet. We have 2 objectives of which you are expected to attain at the end of the lesson. 1. Define phrases, clauses, and sentences. 2. Use phrases, clauses, and sentences appropriately and meaningfully. Writing is one of the best ways of self-expression. At times when people do not want to speak out what they feel inside, they tend to write it down. Graham Greene, a British novelist, once said that writing is a form of therapy. When we write, we start with words, phrases, clauses, then sentences, until such time that we come up with a composition, may it be an article, a poem, or even a song. This learning activity will help you understand the differences between phrases, clauses, to that of sentences. Furthermore, it will guide you on how to use phrases, clauses, and sentences meaningfully and appropriately. To start with, let us talk about phrase. A phrase is a group of words that functions in a sentence as a single part of speech. Phrases do not contain a subject and a verb. They are usually introduced by prepositions. Let us recall what you have learned about prepositions during your past grade levels. A preposition is a word that relates a noun, a pronoun, to another word in a sentence, while a prepositional phrase is a group of words introduced by a preposition and functions in the sentence as an adjective and an adverb. It has at least 2 parts, the preposition and a noun or a pronoun that is the object of the preposition. Here are some examples of prepositions that you need to know in order to be able to identify a prepositional phrase in a sentence. About, above, below, between, on, with, into, of, from, inside, beside, for, before, after, through, and outside.
From my friend is an example of a prepositional phrase. The word from is the preposition that introduces the phrase. My is a pronoun while friend is a noun. Now let's try to use the phrase into a sentence. The flowers from my friend are for sale. The prepositional phrase from my friend is functioning as an adjective. Why? Because it answers the question, which flowers are for sale? And the answer is from my friend. Let's have another example. To the office. To is an example of a preposition that introduces the phrase. The is a determiner, while office is a noun. Now let's use it in a sentence. Bring your card to the office. To the office, which is a prepositional phrase, is used in the sentence as an adverb. Why? Because to the office is describing the word bring, which is a verb.
Congratulations! You are now ready for lesson 2. Note that there are other types of phrases. However, you will be taking them up in their higher grade levels. Here is another important topic that you shouldn't miss. Clause. A clause is a group of words consisting of a subject and a predicate. There are 2 basic kinds of clause. Number 1, the independent clause, and number 2, the subordinate clause.
Number 1. Independent clause. It has a subject and a verb and can stand by itself as a complete sentence. For example, the sun still shines after the rain. We mentioned that an independent clause has a subject and a verb. The subject of the sentence is sun, while the verb in the sentence is shines. Always bear in mind that a subordinate clause is always introduced by a subordinating conjunction. Here are some lists of subordinating conjunctions. When comparing, we're going to use the words than, rather than, whether, as much as, and whereas. When stating time, we use after, as soon as, until, whenever, and now that. Concession, we're going to use though, even though, and although. For relative pronoun, we are going to use who, whoever, whomever, and whose. For reason, we're going to use because, since, so that, in order that, and as. When stating condition, we're going to use if only, unless, provided that, and assuming that. What about for place? We're going to use where and wherever. For relative adjectives, we're going to use that, whatever, which, and whichever. And finally, for manner, we're going to use how, as though, and as if. Here now is an example of a subordinate clause. After she performed her solo. After is the subordinating conjunction that introduces the subordinate or dependent clause. She is the subject of the clause, while performed is a verb. Note that we can expand our sentences by putting together both independent clause and dependent clause. For example, the audience gave a standing ovation after she performed her solo. The audience gave a standing ovation is an example of an independent clause, while after she performed her solo is an example of a dependent clause. As we mentioned earlier, a dependent clause is introduced by a subordinating conjunction. The subordinating conjunction in this clause is after. Even without the dependent clause, our independent clause can still stand as a sentence. Let's have another example. As soon as the blades of the windmill revolve, it generates wind power. As soon as the blades of the windmill revolve is an example of a dependent clause, while it generates wind power is an example of an independent clause. How were we able to identify our dependent clause? It is because of the presence of the words as soon as, which again is a subordinating conjunction. Note that even without our dependent clause, it generates wind power, which is an independent clause, can still stand alone as a sentence. Another example, though it is a tiring activity, spelunking in Sagada remains to be on the top of the to-do lists of the tourists. Though it is a tiring activity is our dependent clause, while spelunking in Sagada remains to be on top of the to-do lists of the tourists is our independent clause, what is the subordinating conjunction that introduced our dependent clause? We have the word though. Note again that even without our dependent clause, our independent clause can still stand alone as a sentence.
Now let's talk about sentence. A sentence is a group of words that expresses a complete thought. It contains a subject and a predicate and ends with a punctuation mark. A sentence has two basic parts. First is the subject. The subject of a sentence names whom or what the sentence is about. It has two types, the simple subject. Second, the complete subject, which includes all the words in the subject of a sentence.
The students of MPGCHS were required to enroll online. Let us use the same sentence in identifying our simple subject to that of a complete subject for you to understand it better. A simple subject is the main word or word group in the complete subject. The subject is usually a noun or a pronoun. So, our simple subject is students. What about for a complete subject? First, we are going to identify what a complete subject is. A complete subject includes all the words in the subject of a sentence. So our complete subject now is the students of MPGCHS.
The second part of a sentence is the predicate. The predicate tells what the subject does or has. It can also tell what the subject is or is like. Just like the subject, a predicate has also two types, namely the simple predicate, which is the main word or word group in the complete predicate, where the predicate is always a verb, and the complete predicate, which includes all the words in the predicate of a sentence.
Using the same sentence we had earlier, we are going to identify simple predicate to that of a complete predicate. A simple predicate is the main word or word group in the complete predicate. The predicate is always a verb. Thus, our simple predicate now is were required. On the other hand, a complete predicate includes all the words in the predicate of a sentence. So in the sentence, our complete predicate is were required to enroll online. We are going to start our complete predicate with our verb until the end of the sentence.
Now that we are done discussing phrases, clauses, and sentences, I do believe that you can answer all the activities in your answer sheet. Here are some points that you should always remember. 1. A phrase is usually introduced by a preposition and it is used in the sentence as a modifier. 2. A clause is a group of words consisting of a subject and a predicate. It has two types, namely the independent clause and the subordinate or dependent clause. The independent clause can stand by itself as a sentence, while the subordinate clause cannot stand as a sentence. The subordinate clause is also called as a dependent clause because it needs an independent clause in order to be called as a sentence. And finally, number 3. A sentence is a group of words that expresses a complete thought. It contains a subject and a predicate and ends with a punctuation mark. To sum it all up, your sentences can have a phrase and a clause or clauses on it. This way, you can better express what you wanted to communicate. That's it for now, my dear learners. See you again in the next episode, only here at DepEd MPTV.